Good evening. It's a blessing to be here. Good to see you all. We're going to be looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and beginning in verse 15 tonight. So please open your Bibles there with me. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verses 15 through 29, as we continue our examination of this book that focuses on life under the sun, the way things are in this world. Oh, there are many problems. There are difficulties that we have talked about and discussed. We've seen Solomon as he's seen all the injustices that exist in life and how he is sometimes even perplexed at these things without answers. You know, chapter 7, here now, beginning in verse 15 especially, gives us some challenging statements by Solomon that I would like to examine a little bit this evening, and hopefully they'll be helpful to us because there are some important lessons here if we can kind of get through some of the difficulties of the language itself. So good to see everyone tonight. We do have visitors. For that, we are especially thankful. One of our visitors tonight is kind of special to me. Micaiah McClain is here from Salt Lake City, Utah, and she's going to be spending a month with us. Well, except for the week that she's going to be gone to Florida College camp in Searcy later. But she's going to be with me and Denise, and so looking forward to that very, very much. And I don't know if she's looking forward to it or not. She's probably thinking, if I could just endure this, I'll be okay. So we'll see. At least she's not here like Janara was. You know, Janara spent a summer with us, and we called it Nana's boot camp. Micaiah's not in that position. She's a great kid, so looking forward to this. Life presents many apparent paradoxes. Why do the righteous suffer? Why do good people have bad things happen? Why? Life isn't fair. That's one of Denise's statements that Micaiah's probably going to hear a few times before she goes home. A fair is a place you go to ride rides. It's not about life. We do need to be careful, though, because we can make our time here much more difficult than it ought to be, just by our behavior, by our words, by our actions. And that's what Solomon discusses in this section. We can fall into the realm of extremes and make things much more difficult for us than they ought to be. Beginning in verse 15, Solomon says, I have seen everything in my days of vanity. There is a just man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs life in his wickedness. Do not be overly righteous, nor be overly wise, nor be foolish. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you grasp this, and also not remove your hand from the other. For he who fears God will escape them all. Wisdom strengthens the wise more than 10 rulers of the city. For there is not a just man on earth who does good and does not sin. Also, do not take to heart everything people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. For many times also your own heart, has known that even you have cursed others. All this I have proved by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. As for that which is far off and exceedingly deep, who can find it out? I applied my heart to know, to search and to seek out wisdom and the reason of things, to know the wickedness of folly, even the folliness and madness. And I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be trapped by her. Here is what I have found, says the preacher, adding one thing to the other to find out the reason, which my soul still seeks, but I cannot find. One man among 1,000 I have found, but a woman among all these I have not found. Truly, this only I have found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. It's kind of like in our last study in the first 14 verses of chapter 7, there are several proverbs, and some of the statements feel rather disjointed. And there is some disjointment going on in this text. He's making several statements that are not directly related to the other, but yet there is a common theme. And I would suggest to you that that common theme is the danger of extremism and how we need to avoid that. And I want to also emphasize some things that he's not saying. But as Solomon again puts life in a test tube, and he sees the injustices that exist, and what's the purpose of injustice? Well, how do we respond to that injustice? Should we go out and hit the streets with our protest signs and march and complain? How should we respond? Well, if we're not careful, our response to the injustices that we see will bring injustice even more harder down on ourselves and others and make things worse. Be careful. Yes, the wicked prosper. You're complaining about that. It's not going to change it. Yes, righteous people suffer. It's a way of life, but don't do things that will bring that suffering on you even quicker. Wisdom can even be painful because the more that we know, the more bad stuff we know, the more heartache we'll experience, the more things we understand as we see the perplexities of life, and it will give us a lot of stresses that will wear us out and burn us out. The dangers of overreaction. Some of those are subjects that we'll be looking at tonight. In verses 15 and 16, verse 15 beginning, I have seen everything in my days of vanity. Now, has Solomon seen everything? Well, not everything. We understand this is a relative concept. The things that he has experienced, and he did experience a lot of things. But he says there is a just man that perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs his life in wickedness. We know the Bible teaches that it rains on the just and on the unjust. Matthew 5 and verse 45. Solomon will take this up again in chapter 8, verses 10 through 14. We understand that, yes, bad things happen to good people. We also understand that good things sometimes happen to wicked people. I mean, that's not fair, is it? But it is life. Now, Solomon understood something that we all need to understand. Job understood this as well in Job 21:30 and Job 20 and verse 29. What's going to be the end of the wicked? Oh, they may have prospered and lived a wonderful life in this world. They may have had everything that you can imagine, all the luxuries of life, and they appear to have an easy life, kind of like that rich man in comparison to Lazarus. Okay? Who had the good life? Well, the man that was not a God-fearer, but he was a wealth seeker. But he died. Oh, there you go. What happened then? He lifts up his eyes in torment. And Lazarus, who did not receive good things in life, he was in the bosom of Abraham, and he was at peace. He was at rest, and he was blessed. We know how things turn out. That's one of the things wisdom should and must teach us. We need to learn to see beyond this world, because if we just focus on the tragedies of this life, we can become very discouraged and very disheartened and depressed. Look beyond this world. Solomon says, do not be overly righteous, nor be overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Do not be overly wicked, nor be foolish. Why should you die before your time? Now, what is Solomon saying here? Is he saying that, well, you just shouldn't be so picky about doing what's right? You know, you shouldn't be such a gnat strainer, right? We all understand that absolute sinless perfection is not practical. How many people do you know that's sinlessly perfect? If you're in the audience tonight and you're sinlessly perfect, please raise your hand. Cameron's being facetious back there. He's being funny. Nobody here is sinlessly perfect. We all know that. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Solomon here is not recommending a half-hearted service or middle-of-the-road mentality when it comes to right or wrong. Okay, that's not his point. But there is a point to be made. Oh, yes, we must be, set ourselves set our treasures up in heaven. We should focus on the things of heaven. We should be loyal only to God. We should set our affections on things above, not on things of this earth. All those things are true. What is Solomon's point, though? You know, it needs to be mentioned that Jesus himself never, ever rebuked anyone for being scrupulous about keeping God's commandments. We hear a lot of people today, well, you know, you people, you just want to make sure that you're right. Well, that's like the Pharisees, isn't it? Well, no, Pharisees weren't not really concerned about being right. They were concerned about doing what they wanted to do and being self-righteous. They saw themselves as righteous and everyone else sinners, but they were not really seeking to do what was right. If they would have been, they would have seen Jesus for who he is. They would have truly been, if they were truly followers of God's will, they would have recognized the Messiah, but they were not. They had established their own traditions, and there's where they fell off the wagon, if you will, as far as being right with God is concerned. They set up their own traditions and their own commandments, and that's what they emphasized. Jesus never rebuked anyone for seeking to be right. In Matthew 23 and verses 23 and 24, we are all familiar with that passage, you know. They strain out the gnats and swallow the camel. Is it wrong to strain out gnats? No. It's not wrong to strain out gnats. It is wrong to swallow the camel, but it is not wrong to strain out gnats. Jesus says, you know, your anise, your mint, you're coming, you pay a tithe of these things. But then, wait a minute, what were they doing? Where was mercy? Where was love and fairness, compassion and judgment as righteous judgment? Where were those things? They've forsaken those things. They were prejudicial. They were self-righteous. They loved themselves and to receive praises of men. That was their problem. Jesus did not rebuke them for straining out gnats. He rebuked them for swallowing the camels. Is it possible to be so focused on religion and what is right that we drive people away? Is it possible that we can be so focused on righteousness and religion that we actually hurt the cause of Christ? Let me give you an illustration of what I'm trying to say. I've got some personal experience in this area, so, okay, I'm going to use myself. When I first began preaching, I spent so much of my time focused on the Bible, which is good, right? Focused on preaching, explaining God's word, learning what it meant. I poured my life and my soul into that. But I forgot something very important. I forgot my wife, and I forgot my kids. Working late hours, helping this person and that person, and answering this question and that question. And I forgot my wife, and I forgot my kids. Is that the right thing to do? You see, we've got to find a balance there. It is necessary. It's important that we search the scriptures daily to see what is sold. As the Bereans, that's great. But we have other responsibilities too. We have family. We have those that are our neighbors. We need to recognize the balance that's necessary in life. And as we are searching for truth, and as we are standing for the truth, and as we are seeking to do only that which is right and acceptable in the sight of God, we must also do it with compassion and love. You know what? Most people in this world have not been as blessed as I. I was raised in a home where the Bible was taught, and I was drugged to church. And I'm very appreciative of that now. But most people around us were not so blessed. We need a little more compassion for them and trying to help them to see the truth. And somewhere along the way, people need to be taught the truth. So their influence can be spread to their children and their grandchildren, and start that snowball, if you will, going in the right direction and not the wrong direction. But there's also in this concept that Solomon is presenting to us the idea of self-preservation. You know, Jesus warned about casting our pearls before the swine and to ravenous dogs. Jesus said, lest they turn and rend you, right? So we need to be. How many of you know anything about a man named Ignatius in the 3rd century? He was a Christian, and he was actually martyred at the Colosseum by Rome. My understanding of Ignatius was that he was convicted and condemned of being a Christian, but he refused and rejected any means of deliverance. People tried to help him, and there were means of help for him that he could have appealed to, like Paul. You know, he appealed to the Roman government to save himself from the Jews. Well, Ignatius did not avail himself of any of the opportunities that he had. He was determined to go and suffer a martyr's death in Rome. I think that's missing the point. You know, I don't think that's the point that when Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me, I don't think he means that I need to live in such a way that I'm going to be condemned to death and not try to live my life while I'm here for the Lord and preaching and teaching the gospel. Instead, I'm just going to let somebody come and kill me. And I don't think that's the point that Jesus is making. That's not what we see in Paul. Paul did all that he could to use the law lawfully to preserve life. Why would you intentionally bring upon yourself harm? Why be overly righteous so that you bring that harm upon yourself intentionally? So there are several things here that we need to think about. The danger of extremes. We can easily, go to one extreme or the other if we're not careful. I actually do believe, by the way, that if you look back in church history, you have the apostate movement away from truth that eventually became the Roman Catholic Church. Well, 1,400 years go by after Christ, and almost 1,000 years of the Roman Catholic Church go by, and a man named Martin Luther comes along and nails his 95 Theses to the door of the All Saints Church in Wittenberg, Germany, in his protest against the Catholic Church, some of their teachings and practices. Well, the problem came to be as Martin Luther continued to pull away from the Roman Catholic Church, he went further and further and further. And it resulted in an extreme position that turns out to be false. The doctrine of salvation by faith alone came from Martin Luther. And others of the Reformed movement picked that mantle up, and they continued to carry it. And even Calvin went further with it. Until you wound up over here where it says, man does nothing, has nothing to do with the salvation whatsoever. Now, which is worse? The Catholic Church or Calvinism? I want to tell you, they're both pretty bad. They're both pretty bad. They're extremes, opposite, actually, of each other, but yet both very wrong. Also, verse 18, it says, it is good that you grasp this and also not remove from your hand from the other, for he who fears God will escape them all. You know, God did not punish and does not punish everybody. I mean, what if God condemned to death immediately, just like that? He struck you dead with a lightning bolt the moment that you sinned. The problem is, there wouldn't be anybody here. You know, God doesn't do that. We'd all have been dead long ago. We probably would not have ever existed. So, okay, God allows evil to continue on. Don't misunderstand that. In fact, Paul talks about this quite a bit in Romans chapter 2. when he talks about the long suffering of God. What is the purpose of God's long suffering? Well, the purpose is to bring us to repentance. But many people misunderstand and misinterpret God's long suffering, and they think that, well, God is not really that serious about sin. I got time. It's all kinds of other excuses. But the fact, just because God does not punish immediately, should not be taken as a license to sin and to think that we can do what we want. That is going to be the end of all. I mean, I don't know how many of you watch shows like OP Live or some of these other cops or some of these. I mean, you see some people that are in some pretty bad conditions because of the choices that they've made, and they destroy their lives because they fail to serve God at all. They don't have no fear for God. Well, the solution to the human problem is fear God and trust Him. Okay? Don't go to extremes. Just trust God and follow Him and do what's right. Mind your own business. How about that? And seek to serve God where He has put you in life. You will spare yourself a lot of heartache, a lot of trouble. And so Solomon says, wisdom strengthens the wise more than 10 rulers of the city, for there is not a just man on earth who does not sin, or who does good and does not sin. Wisdom, the importance of wisdom is emphasized throughout this book, just like in the book of Proverbs. Wisdom. How we all need to be wise. I would say to you that one of the greatest qualities that wisdom brings into a person's life is the quality of patience and endurance. I mean, you're able to just stop and think and look at things and see the outcome of something, but you're willing to do whatever it takes to be patient and endure till that outcome is achieved. You're able to look down the road regarding the consequences of your actions. There are a couple of examples, and for example, in this very book, in chapter 9, verses 13 through 18, where Solomon does talk about, the wisdom and the power of those who are wise, in regard and in contrast, actually, to those who are in political power. Proverbs 21 and verse 22, a city is delivered by the wise. Okay, we need to think about that and emphasize the importance of wisdom. But one of the things that wisdom does, again, recognize is this. And again, careful about extremes. The danger of overreacting. We understand that all sin. Okay? How should we respond to that understanding? Shouldn't that, I look at myself, have I sinned? Absolutely. So when other people sin, am I to be quick to judge them and condemn them? Or should I, and do I need to be patient with them? Long suffering and understanding. Trying to put myself in their shoes. As the older I get, I see the importance of that very thing. Trying to be more understanding of others. That doesn't excuse sin. It doesn't compromise with sin. It simply puts you in a better position to help them. Wisdom, the importance of wisdom. We need to understand that and how to respond to others wisely. Wisdom does not expect perfection. In the process of choosing deacons, I don't know that we're going to find somebody that's perfect, just like with elders. I know I'm not perfect. I know Tony's not perfect. Nobody in his building is perfect. And if we're demanding perfection, is that a realistic expectation? Really? To demand perfection in others is both unreasonable and unwise. Wisdom strengthens the wise more than 10 rulers. Okay? We need to understand, though, that, there's not a just man on earth who does good and does not sin. Actually, suits me. Guidance and godly wisdom will bring us to mercy because we understand this perspective. We understand this point. We've all sinned and we've all come short of the glory of God. Look at verse 21. Also, do not take to heart everything people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. I'm kind of blessed in that regard. At least Denise thinks I am. She thinks that I can't hear a thing. She's pretty right about that. My hearing is not very good. But I do not intentionally not hear her. But I do think that it's there's a blessing in that. You don't hear all the bad stuff that's going on around you. I've been accused of not being able to read the room or not seeing everything. Well, sometimes that's okay. Because you don't want to know what everybody's thinking and everybody's doing to that extreme. I mean, it will ruin your day. The wrong others do, especially to us, okay, is much easier to see, by the way, than our own sin. If we are paying attention to all the wrongs that other people are doing, there's a real good chance that we're seeing all that stuff because we're not spending enough time looking inward. We need to think more about self-inspection than inspecting others and always worrying about what everybody else thinks. By the way, my primary concern is what God thinks about me and how I'm serving God and my relationship with God. And I think that's where everybody needs to focus their attention. Yes, we have responsibilities to others, but we should also at the same time mind our own business, right? And do the things that are good for us and be there to help and encourage and strengthen. But at the same time, we do need to mind our own business in almost every instance. We should be willing to help each other and look for problems and opportunities to help. But at the same time, we need to be careful. Go to extremes there. Verse 23, Solomon emphasizes that wisdom has its limitations. Look, all this I have proved by wisdom. So the things he's talked about are things he's seen. He's examined these things. He understands these things. But notice what else he says. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. Uh-oh. You know, sometimes I want to know everything. But then the more I know, the more I realize I don't know. And that's what Solomon says here. As for that which is far off and exceedingly deep, who can find it out? There are a lot of things in this world I don't know. I don't know why people do some of the things they do. I can't explain it. But I need to know myself, and I need to strive simply to trust God and follow his will and fear him. And like Solomon, I think he allowed some of this stuff, his searches, to really damage him in his actions and the way he lived his life. We'll see that here in just a second. He had all this wisdom, but yet there were a lot of things he doesn't know. Deuteronomy 29:29 is a very important passage. It says the things that are revealed for us. The things that are not revealed are not for us. But why is it that we try? And we spend so much time trying to figure out the things that are not revealed. We try to understand all the things that God hasn't said anything about. Instead of simply trusting him and minding our business and serving him faithfully where we are, we want to know what everybody else is doing, what everything else is happening in the world. We want to know everything there is to know. That's not practical either. Whatever has happened lies beyond our grasp, deep down, deeper than man can fathom. Even when it comes to the Bible, I understand, I know that I'm going to study this book until I die. Lord willing, I'm going to continue to dig. I know this, though, going into it. I am not going to touch the bottom. I never will. There are men who are so much smarter than me, and they live their life trying to find the bottom, and they still haven't found it either. It's too deep. God's ways are past finding out. There are things in this world I don't understand, I'll never understand. But I know who God is. At least I know enough. And I can trust him, and I know that all things work together for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So, who can find it out? I applied my heart, Solomon says, to know, to search and to seek out wisdom and the reason of things, to know the wickedness of folly, even of foolishness and madness. So as you're digging into the wickedness that exists in the world, you're trying to understand the evil that exists in this world. Oh, that's a hole that you'll never reach the bottom of either. To investigate wickedness, I think that this particular search, for anyone who pursues it, will wind up in an extremely depressing mode of thought and life. I know this for a fact, people who have been police officers, and they have to deal with this stuff all the time. And they have to study human behavior, and it's really damaging to people who pursue to know and to understand wickedness. We need to be careful in that regard. Again, I don't think that we are meant to understand the whys of everything, but we simply need to trust God and to accept his will. And even in verse 26, where it says, and I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be trapped by her. You know, those who live in sin, those who are living away and apart from God, what hope do you have? None. And when temptation comes, what strength do you have to resist? None. You know, I tried to, think about this for a minute as far as a biblical example, and I could not think of a better one than that of Joseph in Genesis 39. How many men do you think would have done what Joseph did when Potiphar's wife came to him and tried to entice him to lie with her? How many men do you think would have said no and run away from her? I don't think she was ugly. I really don't. What did it take? How did Joseph resist her? How can I do, and this is a quote from Joseph himself, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Who did Joseph, had Joseph already determined to be faithful to and to please and to serve? So that, I think, explains, he who pleases God shall escape from her. But you put somebody else who didn't fear God in that position, what's going to happen? And you might know that, women are dangerous. You may know that. You might have been told that by your daddy or your mama, and, beware of women. I tried to tell that to my youngest son, and, some people don't listen. And I don't understand why, but they don't. Which of these temptations and trials that we see in this book that, if we just sought God and we sought to please him and that was our goal in life, how many of these pitfalls could we avoid? Verse 28, Solomon winds up by saying, which my soul still seeks, but I cannot find. One man among 1,000 I have found, but a woman among all these I have not found. Now, Solomon's not saying that, men are better than women. That's not Solomon's point. He has found, let's remember something. We're looking at this from Solomon's perspective. Solomon did not have a good track record when it came to women. Okay? He did not have a good track record when it comes to women. And I would suggest to you that the biggest problem in that equation was Solomon himself. If you're looking for the woman because of her beauty, her outward beauty, her riches and wealth, and what this connection and what this marriage relationship can do for your kingdom and your wealth, you're looking at it all wrong. And that's what Solomon was doing. He was doing, was it Johnny Lee that sang that song, Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places? Well, that's what Solomon was doing. Now, he could find some guys who would stand up with him and be good friends and loyal, but women, he couldn't find that. Again, he was looking for love in all the wrong places. As wise as Solomon was, what was his downfall? Verse 29, truly this only I have found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. As I close this, I want you to think about something. All of sin and come short of the glory of God. No one denies that. But man was not created in sin. Man was not created a sinner. And I'll say something else. Man does not become automatically a sinner just because Adam and Eve sinned. Man becomes a sinner when he himself sins. Romans 5 and verse 12. Adam opened the door to sin. That's true. But we become sinners, as Paul says, because all have sinned. I'm not born a sinner. God made man upright. And that's not just Adam and Eve. I know some commentators and scholars, they'll emphasize, well, this was Adam and Eve at the beginning. Let me suggest to you, that's not Solomon's point. Mankind itself was made in God's image. That's even said in Genesis chapter 9, when the death penalty was pronounced against anyone who would take an innocent man's life. Why? Because man is created in whose image? God's. God is the source of our being, not Satan. We are made upright. But we have sought out many schemes. Man has turned aside. We see that over and over in Scripture. Romans 3, which Calvinists always point to. See, look at Romans 3. None of them seek after God. Well, no. Why? Because they're seeking after themselves. Because they have turned aside. They have closed their ears. They have closed their eyes. That's what Jesus says in Matthew 13 and verse 15 when he's explaining the reason for parables. Because they have closed their eyes. So let us not close our eyes to the things of God. And let us also be wary of the dangers of extremes. You know, we can spend all of our time searching for that which is right, but we can go too far. You know, I've always heard it said, I believe it's true, that you can fall off a log on either side. It's just true. The world is not fair, but why make it harder than it has to be? Why put ourselves in dangerous and perilous positions because of our choices, whether good or bad? Certainly we must seek to please God. We must fear Him and we must follow His commandments. We must do what's right. But when we become like, you know, as it came to be like Ignatius and those that came after him, you know, you have these monks who would go up in these monasteries and they would spend their life just isolated from everybody else. What are they doing? They're going to an extreme. Are they any good for the kingdom of heaven in that lifestyle? No. Be wise, but avoid extremes. Do not be over demanding of other people. Be patient and be merciful. Be loving and kind. Be an encouragement to in the lives of others. Life has a lot of paradoxes. There are limitations to what we can know and understand. But what we all need to understand is that we all need Jesus. We all need the Lord. Because we've all sinned, we've all come short of the glory of God. Therefore, we need God and His forgiveness, His salvation, and His deliverance. Maybe you're here tonight and you've never rendered obedience to the gospel of Jesus Christ. You've never submitted to Him as Lord of Lords and King of Kings. He can save your soul from sin. He can save you from condemnation. That doesn't mean He's going to save you to live a life of luxury in this world. No, you may very well, because you're a child of God, suffer even more. But let's think about beyond this world. Be a Lazarus. Be someone who yields and surrenders your life to the Lord and look for heaven and spiritual things instead of the things under the sun. Maybe we can help you tonight. If you're here and you need to be baptized into Christ for the remission of your sins, let us help you. Won't you come while together we stand, while we sing. As it been, since you told